You know how many takes it takes to get a take right? Just leave you with that kind of riddle. Anyways, it is a beautiful Sabbath day. I'm kind of tired. I've messed up a couple of times now. So, this is like my third take on this. It's a beautiful Sabbath day. I'm going to try to get this episode out today, recording on March 26th, but it's almost 80 degrees out, and I'm sleepy, so I'm kind of losing my place. Anyways, we have a lot to get through today. As can be seen by my water glass. I'm going to need that. Because we are going through about 14 chapters. We are finishing up Genesis. We're going to pick up again in 36. And in order to actually look at the Bible, you need a Bible. Or a computer. But my computer's inside, so the original version is going to have to do. And we are going to go ahead, before we start, I want to go ahead and bring up that it has come to my attention that I didn't really notice or elaborate on, I didn't notice about the idols that Laban had until I was reading through that section, until the last episode. And I can't really give you a reason he had them. We know that when his father was still there, they were godly men. Abraham sent his servant there to get Isaac a wife. There is a lot of names going around. I am sorry. I haven't had nearly enough coffee today for this. By nearly, I mean at all. This is me without coffee. Probably a bad idea. Anyways, and that might explain the differences we see between them dealing with Abraham's servants and with Jacob. Just a theory, or hypothesis, I guess. I've got no proof to back it up. All we know is that they did have the idols. Rachel brought the idols with them. Unfortunately, there's not really much more detail than that. So we're going to start out sometime later. In fact, a lot of time later. At this point, Jacob has 12 sons. I almost said 10. I am sorry. 10 sons are really prevalent. They kind of move as a group. 2 sons are Rachel's. Actually, she had a very hard time bearing children. She bore Joseph, and that's when Jacob made a decision to take them out of Laban's house. And then she dies in childbirth, having Benjamin. So, and remember, Rachel was the one woman Jacob loved. So these 2 children are the only ones he has left of her. And it tells us that Joseph is a very favored child. His father actually makes him a coat of many colors, which is a very clear sign of his favoritism. And as a sibling, I can tell you that if one child gets shown favoritism, that resentment builds up. So at this time, when we're looking at it, when we're picking up the story, he's 17. And of course, 17-year-old younger brother would never antagonize his older brothers or be an annoyance to his older brothers. Never. Anyways, so he's the favored son. And when we're going ahead and we're looking at chapter 37 now, that Joseph has 2 dreams, and he tells his brother these dreams, and like I said, we have a lot to get through, so I'm not actually going to go ahead and say these dreams. You can look at them in 37, and I will go ahead and tell you where the dreams are at, but you can go look at them on your own time. This thing's going to take an hour as is, especially with my tangents. There I go again. He dreams 2 dreams, and both of them is setting his superiority gets set over his brothers. Basically, the dreams are going, you guys are going to serve me, and he tells the brothers this, which was probably a mistake. They're mad. This resentment's building up over time. And when you're angry at someone, you're not expecting them to come with the kindness of their heart or goodness in their heart. You're expecting them to come and bring conflict with them. And this happens later in the same chapter when his brothers take their flocks to go to Shechem to feed them, to care for them. And it's kind of... He's still being called Okay, in my defense, I'm going to get switched up between Israel and Jacob, because this switches up between Israel and Jacob. Here, he's being called Israel when he's telling Joseph to go check on his brothers to make sure everything's all right. Later, like a chapter later, correction, 21 verses later, he's called Jacob. So in my defense, it flips up. Don't shoot the messenger. And so Joseph goes to track down his brothers. They aren't in Shechem. They are actually in Dothan. He went and finds them in Dothan. They don't even let him speak. They see him coming, and they're already angry. There he says, "Here comes the dreamer. Why don't we just kill him?" Kind of extreme, but it was a violent world those days, and that seemed like a perfectly acceptable option. Just like, let's kill him and tell Dad that a beast did it. But Reuben goes ahead and intervenes and says, "Let's not kill him. We got this pit over here. It's got no water in it. Let's just throw him in it." So they don't give him a chance to speak. They grab him, rip the coat off of him, throw him down into this pit, and Reuben leaves. And remember, he was the one convincing him not to go ahead and kill Joseph. So the general consensus, the general idea and thought of it was he was planning to come back later and get Joseph out of there. But he leaves, and Judah has his own chapter when he was dealing with Tamar. I'm going to get shot for my pronunciation of these one of these days. Or sued. Or both. But I'm not going to go through that. We already have a ton to cover. And if you want to go maybe later too, I can go ahead and do a special episode on that. But we're going to skip over it. And Judah sees a company of Ishmaelites coming. He's like, it's not going to gain us anything for killing him. Let's go ahead and sell him. So they pull him out. They sell him for 20 pieces of silver. Quick note, Jesus was sold and betrayed by Judas, who was as close as all of his disciples were as close as his brother, for 30 pieces of silver. And so they sell him, and he eventually ends up in Egypt. Actually, it's not eventually. Not long after he ends up in Egypt. I almost said a completely different name. Reuben comes on back and finds Joseph gone, finds out what they did, tears his clothes, and that is a sign of agony or mourning. So they took the coat of many colors, they killed a goat kid, they put the blood over it, they present the coat to their father in 32, and they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "This we have found, know now whether it be thy son's coat or no." They're acting clueless. And he knew it and said, "It is my son's coat, and evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces." And he actually refuses to be comforted. He says he's going to go down to the grave mourning for Joseph. And Joseph, in the meantime, ends up over in Egypt. He actually ends up in Potiphar's house and tells us Potiphar is an officer, and I should open up my notes, and a captain of the guard. Or captain of the guard. Actually, it just says captain of the guard, not a or the. To where I'm supposed to be in my notes. And God's with Joseph. God blesses Potiphar's house incredibly. It actually says in chapter 39, verse 6, "And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not what he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored." So Joseph wasn't really a shepherd, as we understand it, but he was still a favored son. He was well learned, from what we can understand. This was probably what he did. He kind of oversaw. And remember, in those days, the wind's flipping the pages all over. In those days, the favored son, normally the eldest son, goes ahead and takes over from his father. So Joseph might have been very well practicing keeping the books, so to speak, for Israel. I'm thinking just combining the names, but I'm just going to call Jacob Israel from now on to save confusion. So, at any rate, he goes ahead and he's taking care of all Potiphar's things. And then a woman comes into it and messes it all up. I can't say I kid, because that's actually what happened in this story. Not that a woman messes it all up. I sure hope my fiance isn't hearing this. I think we're good. Anyways, so Potiphar's wife gets the hots for this Hebrew. And she goes ahead, and when no men are in the house, she grabs a hold of his clothes and basically says, "Come sleep with me." Joseph, trying to switch from the last episode, Joseph flees. He actually leaves his garments in her hand, and that was probably that kind of skirt. This is Egypt. They don't really wear trousers. That's colder temperatures. They don't really wear shirts. It's probably the same style. You basically wore a long skirt. An Egyptian kilt. I love kilts. Another tangent. Notice how often those come up? Anyways, he leaves it in her hand, and she lays on it till Potiphar comes home. Now, the King James Version translates this over as saying that she said that the new servant came in and to mock her. More correctly, it's probably her accusing him of trying to force himself on her. When she screamed, he fled. That's the story she concocts. And says Potiphar's anger was kindled, and he threw Joseph in prison. And the same scenario happens with the prison the guy in charge of the prison. Not the whole wife trying to sleep with Joseph, the whole putting everything in Joseph's hands. He went from a captain of the guard, just overseeing his entire house, and that's the level of trust that was placed in him, to doing the same thing in the prison. And just kind of funny, it's like, the area may have changed, but his job really didn't. God was still with him. In fact, it goes ahead and says that in 23, the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. The key thing about Joseph being in this prison was because it came to pass that chapter 40 now, that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. They got thrown into the same prison Joseph was at. And they both have dreams. And they're looking sad one day. So Joseph comes on up to him and goes, "Why are you sad?" And they tell him that they both had dreams. And if we look at it in chapter 40, verse 8, and they said to him, "We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it." Remember, this was something very big. The Pharaoh has wise men and magicians, interpreters of dreams. And so this is something very big in Egypt. Dreams having meaning, being interpreted. And Joseph said unto them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you." This is something that's going to be very important in the next chapter. It'd be very important if the wind could stop blowing, but that's kind of like asking the sun to stop shining. It ain't going to happen. And now it's keep getting ruffled up. So they tell him his dreams, and through God, he interprets them correctly. In 3 days, the butler is going to go ahead and be pardoned and restored to his previous place, and the baker's going to get killed. And Joseph asks of the butler to go ahead and remember him, to make mention of him to Pharaoh. He's essentially once out of prison. He may be, overseeing everything, but he's still a prisoner. And it comes to pass as Joseph says. And the butler completely forgets about Joseph for 2 years. And in 2 years' time, Pharaoh has 2 dreams. And basically the dreams are 7 cows, to kind of give you a heads on it, 7 cows, very fat. Then 7 very lean cows to come devour these cows and are still skinny, malnourished. Then 7 heads of grain come up. 7 heads of grain, making sure. 7 ears of corn come on up. Full, best ears of corn he's ever seen. Then 7 terrible ears come up, devour the good ears, and are still terrible. And he calls all of his magicians, all of his wise men, and not a single one can interpret this dream. Remember the verse? Kind of the faint mention I told you to remember? The butler finally remembers Joseph, and he brings it up to Pharaoh. He's like, when I was in the prison, this Hebrew there interpreted mine and your baker's dreams, and they were correct interpretations. So Pharaoh calls forth Joseph, and Joseph goes ahead and, through God's interpretation, God's wisdom, goes ahead and interprets these dreams correctly. There's going to be 7 years of plenty of just so much coming. You're going to get so prosperous. And then 7 years of absolute horrible famine, the likes that has never been seen, so that people forget these 7 good years. And basically, the speaker is getting ahead of himself. And once he goes ahead and says, God gave you this dream, it's going to very soon come to pass. Go ahead and have someone very wise, very discreet, during these 7 years, have them gather up all in parts of all these harvests to set up against the wind, against these 7 years of famine. And third time's the charm, I guess. Pharaoh goes ahead and in chapter 41, verse 37, and the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such as one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God had showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. He puts him second in command over the entirety of Egypt. It's very interesting to go ahead and look that in several sections of the Bible, there is an acknowledgement that God is with this person, basically the main character in book terms. And it comes from an unbelieving party. So it's very important and to keep in mind that even though someone may not necessarily know God or study the Bible, they can see his effect on you. They can see his working. If you have God's focus on you, kind of a scary thought. So, oh no, what if I mess up? If God is favoring you, if God is focused on you, and you are doing his will, people are going to see that, even if they don't know exactly who God is or exactly what you believe in. Your actions will always show the fruit of your labors. I believe there might have been an important person somewhere in here that said along those lines. I don't know. But anyways, so Joseph gets set above Egypt to gather up everything, and during this time, he actually goes ahead and, during these 7 years of plenty, he marries and has 2 sons. And here's a key difference between his marrying you could say someone outside the faith, and a lot of the other marriages we see is he always puts God first. Even with naming his sons, he's acknowledging God's blessing. And there's almost not really any anger you see. You don't really see a lot of resentment. And even later, when you do encounter his brothers, he doesn't really act out of resentment. You're going to see this very closely, and it is a core part of his character, that he has been able to see God's hand in this. So we're going to go ahead and looking at the area that the pages got blown over again. Now, kind of curious to look before we continue on to Joseph's brothers visiting Egypt. Is in 40. In fact, let's go back to 40, where we had left off. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all of Egypt. This is something very important to look at. We have the ruler of Egypt in the time, basically, his land is about to face the worst crisis they ever have that could wipe them out. It's a natural disaster. You can't form an army against a natural disaster. He's taken this man, who he really doesn't know a lot about. This was his first impression. And going, you rule everything. And this is going to come in very much a key to what later happens to Egypt during the famine. So looking over in 42... Oh, right, going back to the Joseph being married. So if you're not always going to marry in the faith. As a Christian, you're not always going to find that the people in the faith are the ones that you need beside you. You have to make sure you keep your eye on God. Keep Him first. And as is proven by, the second in command of all Egypt, that can work. But you listen to God, you keep your eye on Him, you trust Him, you don't force it, you don't put anyone above God. If you do that, then God's going to show you the right person. So then, we have to remember that the famine's not just in Egypt. We're told it's spread over all the lands. Over the face of the earth, in fact. And everyone's coming to buy corn. It's a big part of it. Seed corn, food. And Joseph's brothers also go. Something to keep in mind is, at this point, Joseph is, we've had the 13 years. When he stood before Pharaoh, he was 30. 7 years have already passed. So he's 37, 38 at this point. 20 years can change a person a lot. And everyone comes to Joseph. He's basically the one giving the approval, making sure that nobody's trying to invade Egypt during this time, making sure there's no spies. And he looks like an Egyptian, he walks like an Egyptian, he talks like an Egyptian, he speaks Egyptian fluently. And he actually goes ahead and speaks to his brothers through an interpreter. So there is no indication that at this point they really think he's dead. So there's no indication that this second in command of Egypt is their long lost brother. And he sees them. And it says in chapter 42, verse 7, that he made himself strange to them. He spoke roughly. He accuses them of being spies. And they accuse them of trying and looking at Egypt's weakness and trying to come in and spy. And they're trying to protest. And they kind of give their story, rough estimate of their story, and basically says, you know what, I'm going to send one of you, because you say you've got this younger brother, I think you're lying, we're going to send one of you back and bring that younger brother here. Well, then he goes ahead and just puts him in prison. He's dealing very roughly, almost very erratically with them. Kind of getting that worrying there. And he puts them all in prison for 3 days. And on the third day, which the whole 3 days happens a lot in the Bible. So then looking at 18, and Joseph said unto them the third day, this do and live, for I fear God. Bringing that in, kind of a reminder there, jab at him. Basically saying, you're going to, leave one of your brothers behind as a prisoner. You're going to be allowed to buy provisions. You're going to take him back. You will not be allowed to buy any provisions again unless you bring that youngest brother here so I can see him. And then he goes, but this is a sign that he is testing them. He's not actually trying to be harsh. And he may be worried about Benjamin. Again, Benjamin is the youngest. He's also Rachel's child. Joseph may very well have been afraid that his brothers dealt with Benjamin like they had dealt with him. So he is afraid for Benjamin's sake. But he's not being cruel. You actually see further in, And they're talking amongst themselves. They don't know that he can understand them. He actually goes ahead and turns away from him, cries doing this, turns back to him, continues on, just to act very rough. And he has the money that they bought the corn with, the sacks of corn, put back in the sacks. Like, sewn back into the sacks. And they find it later, and they are terrified. They're like, we paid. What's this money doing here? We're going to get accused of stealing. This is going to look very good on our record. He already thinks we're spies. So he gets back, and they get back, they tell their father what happened, and he flat out refuses to let them take Benjamin. He's not going to lose another son. But the famine continues, and they have to. They get to the point where they are going to starve. And Judah, he really takes the lead on this. He's not the eldest, but he is taking a lot of the leadership. First off, first part not in the good way, selling Joseph. Now he really is. He knows that he's really responsible. So he tells his father, if I don't bring Benjamin back to you, let the guilt be on me forever. And that's very, the whole immortal soul thing. This is a very big thing. So that accepting of that type of guilt is a very serious matter. And it's also the thing that convinces Israel to go ahead and let Benjamin go with him. But he's not going to send them empty-handed. He knows the danger, and he knows that if this guy thinks that his sons have stole from him, they're probably not going to come back alive. And if they don't come back alive and with this food, everyone's going to die. So he goes ahead and sends him the best fruit of your land, the land in your valley. And that's why we have the water. Let's try that one again. The best fruits in the land in your vessels. Basically tell him to take this stuff. A little balm and honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, almonds, and he sends them with double the money to basically go to, even though they don't know it's Joseph, go to Joseph and say, here's double. We found this in our sacks. We are not stealing from you. Here's the double the amount. And they get back to Egypt, and they are afraid, as they kind of should be at this point. And they go to the steward immediately. Go, we found the money in the sacks. Here's double. And he goes. His response is, well, God must have blessed you because I got it written right here that we received your payment for the last one. Kind of also throwing them off. They know. This is the guy who was in charge of putting the money in the sacks in the first place. This is Joseph's steward. And he's probably trying to not to laugh his butt off. So, messing with him. Joseph messed with his brothers quite a bit, which is, looking at us, it's funny. His brothers may have thought it less so. But yes, they went ahead and she's like, yeah, we've got your money. So they they do deliver the presents, and Simon is the one, and I do believe Simon is the oldest. Simon was the one who stayed behind. They brought him out of the prison, put him with the brothers, and they went ahead and they got taken care of. They got fed. The donkeys they brought were go ahead and the donkeys were looked after. But he sees Benjamin. He knows he's alive. He actually has Benjamin given 5 times the food as the other brothers. The Egyptians and Hebrews did not eat together. It was an abomination in the eyes of the Egyptians. For whatever reason, I don't know. But yeah, Benjamin's presented 5 times the food, and my Bible is still wanting to flip around, so we're going to close that real fast. But Joseph isn't done yet. There might have been some doubt going, they may have only brought him, to save themselves. I don't know whether they've changed. I don't know whether they intend harm. Whatever the reason, he had one final test. And he has this silver goblet we kind of think, gold more valuable than silver. But in the book about Joseph, written by Terry Fivish, a very good author, the book's like this big, this wide, this thick. It is a big book. Probably not all of it's accurate, but she goes ahead and, in her words and her explanation, silver was more rare in Egypt. They had abundance of gold, but only a little silver. So it's very important, and considering it's his personal goblet, he has it hidden in the sacks of grain. Along with the money, they took the purchase price again, and like last time, put it in the sacks. I'm going to make sure I'm accurate on that. I think I am, but I am second guessing myself. Yep. 44 verse 1. They put the money back in the sacks. 44 verse 2 is where they put the cup. And if you don't know that, I'm going to let that... You can probably figure it out, but I'm going to let that kind of stew a little. So his men... He sends his men after them and tells them how to speak to him. And says... Is not this it which my Lord drinketh? That, I started on the wrong verse, looking at 4. And when they were gone out of the city, and not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, Up, follow after the men, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, Wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Is not this it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby he indeed divineth? Ye have done evil in so doing. They thought that the cup was what he looked into and was able to see the future. That's how he interpreted it. They ascribed a magical significance to this cup. So, and in 6, says the steward overcame him. And then looking at 7, they go, and said unto him, Wherefore saith my Lord these words? God forbid that thy servant should do according to these things. And they're like, yes, the money was found in the sack, Mouse. But we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. So basically saying, the money we found we brought to you again, but you said that you had it. And so they finally go, whoever you find the cup, like whoever sack you find the cup in, kill him. Basically kind of, we didn't put it there. We didn't steal it. And he searches from the oldest to the youngest. Gotta wonder how he knew that. Joseph told him that's the point. They probably wondered how he knew that. But anyways. And he finds it in Benjamin's sack. And every single brother tore their clothes. They loaded up. They went back. They are not going to lose another brother. They have lived 20 years with their father in constant mourning. 20 years of their consciousnesses being torn up by what they did. They are not losing their youngest brother. They become protective of them. And they go on back. And Joseph says, you know what? That guy that my cup was found on, I'm going to have him as my servant. The rest of you can go. Judah steps up and argues against Joseph. Well, more pleads against Joseph. And says, if our father loses him, it's going to kill him. Take me in his place. Take me as your servant instead. This was the guy in charge of sending Joseph away. And this breaks Joseph down. Like, he can't keep up this facade anymore. Looking at 45, he couldn't refrain himself. He reveals his identity to him. And in 2, it says he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And basically, he tells him, come here. And don't be grieved. Don't be angry. God sent me before you to preserve your life. At this point, he's already acknowledging, I'm not angry at you. This served a purpose. Tell me about my father. Here's wagons. Go to him. Take this food. Take these wagons. Bring everyone here. Bring my father to me. This famine's going to continue 5 more years. Come here. I'm going to take care of you. Don't worry about your stuff. Egypt's before you. You can have whatever you want. Come. And they get to they actually go before Pharaoh first. And looking at 45:16, And the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Say unto thy brethren, This do ye, lade your beasts, and go get you unto the land of Canaan. And take your father and your households, and come to me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. They didn't first time, second time in Egypt, I'm sorry. They went in Egypt 3 times. First time was when he accused them. Second time, Pharaoh didn't even meet these guys. All he heard is Jacob's brothers are here. He's like, bring your entire family. Didn't even see these guys. Like, you're going to have all of Egypt before you. That's the level of trust Pharaoh had in Joseph. Just them being his brothers, like, bring your entire family. Israel didn't believe him at first. This is a guy who spent 21 years now in mourning for his son. Somewhere there. And he didn't believe him at first that he's alive, and then they're like, see all this. I'm trying to hurry. My camera's going to die. And I don't know where the spare battery is. And he sees when they're like, he sent this to you. And it says that the spirit of Jacob was revived. And he's like, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go see him before I die. So they go ahead, and everyone comes to Egypt. And Joseph came and told Pharaoh in 47, My father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan. Behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. So he didn't bring them all. He brought 5 of them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's like, what do you do for a living? We're shepherds. And they said moreover unto Pharaoh, For to sojourn in the land are we come. For thy servants have no pasture in their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh's like, take the fat of the land. Take what you want. And he tells Joseph, if any one of these is, I believe it says active, if any men have activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. Later on, later in the chapter, Pharaoh becomes very rich during this time. And he's got a lot of herds. And so you kind of put yourself in his shoes. He's got a mass amount of cattle and sheep. And mostly cattle, from what I understand. Now you've got your trusted right-hand man, the one who pretty much saved Egypt, the one who interpreted your dreams, the one you've set over. He's got 10 brothers who are shepherds? Oh, that solves my problem. Essentially what happened. And Pharaoh goes ahead and Joseph brings Jacob before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, from what we understand, really looks at it. He deals very respectably with Jacob. And Jacob's at this point 130 years old. And Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Okay? This is, again, king of all Egypt. In 10, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. Just kind of have to put yourself in the shoes of Pharaoh's servants seeing this. Our Lord is the most mighty man in all the land, and this... there's the father of the second in command, and he is blessing Pharaoh. I'm sorry, what's going on? What did they put on our wine this morning? But the famine continues, and Egypt's really got nothing left to give. From what you're thinking of the noble houses in any culture, they're going to struggle against the royal faction for power. It's a very common problem. But as this goes on, they sell all their possessions. They sell everything, and they sell their land. Eventually, they sell themselves. They have to go ahead and say, we've got nothing left to give, we're going to starve. And they end up selling themselves to Joseph, and by extension, Pharaoh. And the law was then, from then on, that 20% of all their earnings went to Pharaoh. It was a 20% tax on everything. They sold themselves, but Joseph is like, I'm not going to take everything you have, but you're not going to have the power that you had beforehand. You're not going to have the stuff you had beforehand. And Pharaoh was very, very, very pleased with Joseph. So, in 48, we see that Jacob, or Israel, is dying. And he calls in Joseph, makes him promise that he will not be buried in Egypt. Blesses Joseph's sons, and he blesses the youngest, basically puts his hand on him. He can't really see. Blesses the youngest one, his right hand. Puts it on his head as he's blessing him. Joseph tries to move it off, tries to correct his father. He's like, hey, that's the younger born. Go ahead and put your right hand on my oldest born. And his father refused in 48:19, and his father's refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. Which is kind of funny that Joseph objected, considering where he was in the birth lineup, and I don't even know why I write my notes anymore. I never go by him. Jacob calls in the rest of his sons, he blesses them, and before he dies, he goes ahead and he tells Jacob that he will be brought out and back to the land of his fathers. So basically, that's really the first promise and indication of you are going to be going back to Canaan one day. Jacob went ahead and died after the 40 days of basically mourning was fulfilled. But went to talk to Pharaoh and said, my father made me a promise not to bury him in Egypt. And Pharaoh said, go bury him as you swore your father. This is the man, Joseph is dealing very respectfully. After all, it is Pharaoh. But Pharaoh is going, go do it. You swore, go bury him. And actually, after his father dies, over in chapter 50, after his father dies, his brothers are afraid. They're afraid he's going to try to seek revenge on him, and he goes and he comforts them. He speaks very kindly with them, going, I meant what I said before. God intended this. I don't hold any anger to you. And then we're looking at 22. We're looking at the end of the chapter, end of the book. Joseph saw, and says, Ephraim's children of the third generation. So basically great-grandchildren before he died. He was actually buried in Egypt in a coffin. And 24 and 25. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he swore to Abraham, and to Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. So I do believe his bones were taken out of Israel one day. Out of Egypt one day. And that's actually where we get this saying, the children of Israel. Because we're referring really to the children of the man, not the nation. Ooh, that was a lot of speaking. The really key thing we can see in this is that we actually have the parallel of Abraham years prior, generations prior, a couple generations prior, of when Abraham went, when I said he was, spoiler, went into Egypt, there was a famine, left Egypt later, after plagues, with lots of wealth. That was the speedrun version of what happens to the children of Israel. It's a little rougher for them, but it does happen. We actually have now finished Genesis. We're going to be looking at Exodus. The main real point of this story is always trust in God and never take retribution for what's been done to you. We're told in the Bible we have full right to defend ourselves, and if anyone wants to debate that, I got an entire sermon ready for you. So you're allowed to defend yourself, but you never seek revenge, you never seek retribution. Where you're at is where you're supposed to go ahead and do what you can. You always have a job. You always have something you can do, something you can help with. Where you're at is where you're supposed to blossom, until God moves you. You always keep your eyes on God. He's going to bless you, and He's going to, no matter what storm you get into, He's going to carry you through, as long as you trust in Him. So, trusting in God always, and not seeking retribution no matter what's been done to you. And Revelation, I believe, that's when God says, vengeance is mine. So You go ahead and trust the guy in charge of the entire universe to handle things, show mercy and kindness whenever possible, and trust he's got a plan. Trust that where you're at right now, there's a job for you to do. There is something else you can help with, no matter how little or how much you can do. Joseph was someone who was appointed over 3 different households completely, the 4th one being the entirety of Egypt, after he got thrown into a pit and sold into slavery by his brothers. So you gotta wonder what God's plan is for each of us. We can't know. But we can sure as heck do His will where we're at. So, that was a long-winded explanation of that. Next week, or more correctly next episode, we will go ahead and start looking to Exodus. And oh boy, that is a story.